What happened this year? What happened? People went mad, you know? Spike got mad, and Sharpton got mad, and Jada went mad, and Will went mad. Everybody went mad.
The boycott didn't shake the Oscars. It straight up revealed who had real pull and who didn't. When Jada Pinkett Smith said she wouldn't show up, everything flipped fast. The talk stopped being about Hollywood's accountability and turned into a personal drama, and Chris Rock caught that switch in seconds. The Academy didn't panic. The event didn't crumble. The whole machine rolled on like nothing happened. Rock didn't go after the protest itself. He flipped the perspective completely. He made it clear that a boycott only hits hard if people feel your absence, and Hollywood keeps it brutally real about that kind of math. The truth is, these award shows don't hand out trophies for good morals. They hand them out for staying relevant.
Hey, it's Chris, and there are now 24 hours until Selective Outrage is live on Netflix. Unless you're saying this a few hours from now, then it's not accurate at all. Look, just put the info on the screen.
When Chris pointed out that skipping an invite you never even got isn't resistance, he wasn't just cracking a joke. He was calling out how power really plays out in that room. He pulled back the curtain, showing that some people talk rebellion without ever being part of the game in the first place.
Y'all know what happened to me, getting smacked by Suge Smith. He know he could beat. That is some ass. Years ago, his wife said I should quit the Oscars. I shouldn't host because her man didn't get nominated. So then I do some jokes about her. Who gives a? That's how it is. She starts it, I finish it. That's what the happened. Nobody's picking on this bitch. She started this.
That's exactly when Will Smith got pulled into the picture, not as a villain, but as the one who ended up caught in the middle. Chris mentioned the frustration around concussion, but then zoomed the lens out wider than anyone expected. In that same Hollywood circle that ignored his award chances, Will had already been showered with huge paychecks for movies everyone knew weren't his best. That's the twisted truth of the business. Yeah, it's injustice, but outrage in Hollywood always runs on timing, not values. Then Chris took it up another notch, dropping Kevin Hart's name, and that hit hard in a year when black creatives were done staying quiet about being shut out. Kevin Hart was everywhere. Movies, hosting gigs, franchises, his face was on every screen and every stage. That kind of success totally clashed with the whole boycott narrative. If Hollywood was really locking people out, it clearly wasn't doing it the same way for everyone. By the time Chris wrapped up that monologue, the impact was sealed. He didn't just poke fun at celebrities. He ripped apart the idea that symbolic protests could scare a system powered by money. And the wildest part? That moment planted something that didn't fade. It simmered quietly, waiting for its comeback. It sat deep, and when Chris Rock walked back onto that Oscar stage years later, the energy was different. The stakes weren't just talk anymore. They were real, personal, and heavy. That pressure never went away. It followed him right into that spotlight. Now the vibe in the room was lighter, smoother, and everyone thought they were about to get a classic Chris Rock roast. The industry might have acted like it had moved on, but the past was still sitting in the room. When Chris started working the crowd again, it felt all too familiar, like history was gearing up for another twist. It started off smooth, quick jabs, light hits, the usual Hollywood self-roast that everyone could laugh at. But then, with just one line, one joke, the whole energy in the room shifted. The laughter froze, and what replaced it wasn't amusement, it was calculation. The air got thick because the problem wasn't really the joke, it was the baggage behind it, the unspoken history everyone knew but nobody dared to mention. This wasn't a new clash, it was old tension walking straight into a live broadcast. At first, it seemed under control. Will Smith even laughed, and that tiny moment spoke volumes. It looked like he was playing along, like it was all part of the show. But then he saw Jada's face, and everything flipped in an instant. That moment turned from humor to heat. Suddenly, it wasn't about comedy. It was about pride, image, and years of quiet pressure snapping all at once. What happened next shattered the whole illusion. Hollywood runs on control. Award shows survive on the belief that nothing real ever happens on those stages, that every second is perfectly scripted. But when Will Smith walked up and slapped Chris Rock in front of the world, that entire fantasy cracked open. The audience didn't freeze because of the hit itself. They froze because for the first time, the script was gone. No cue cards, no plan, no safety net, just raw reality playing out live. Chris didn't swing back. He didn't yell. He just stood there, stunned, processing, but still holding his ground. In that chaos, he did the one thing Hollywood desperately needed. He kept the show going. That moment of restraint said more than any punchline he'd ever written, because that slap, that wasn't the grand finale. That was the opening act of something much bigger. And what Chris Rock didn't say that night turned out to be way more explosive than anything he could ever have said on that stage. Silence turned into the headline for the whole year after that slap. Chris Rock didn't say a word. No interviews, no tearful confessions, no victory speeches, nothing. That quiet made people restless. They wanted drama, instant reaction, some kind of explosion. But his silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Chris knew something the internet didn't. Timing is power, and patience can hit harder than any comeback. While he stayed quiet, the story twisted in every direction. Debates blew up. Was the slap justified? Was it staged? Was it payback? Everyone had an opinion. Will Smith dropped a few apologies. The Academy handed out punishments, and social media split into chaos. Fans arguing, influencers analyzing, people taking sides like it was a championship game. But through all that noise, the one person who could have flipped the story, Chris Rock, kept his mouth shut, letting the tension grow and every headline spin without him lifting a finger. When Chris finally broke his silence, he did it his way, on stage, where the spotlight and the control was all his, and he didn't hold back. He faced the slap head on. No overacting, no playing victim, just raw truth. He said it straight, it hurt, and it still did. That kind of honesty sliced through a year of wild rumors and think pieces in seconds. Then he flipped the whole narrative. Chris made it clear this was never just about one joke. It was about selective outrage. He laid it out plain. Everyone involved already knew the real backstory, and none of it started with him. He wasn't going to carry guilt that wasn't his to bear, and he sure wasn't going to take responsibility for personal drama that others had already dragged into the public eye on their own.
Nobody was picking on her. For people that don't know, what everybody knows, Wilson and his wife was her son's friend. Now, I normally would not talk about this, but for some reason, these just put that on the internet. I have no idea why two talented people would do something that low down. What the We all been cheated on. Everybody in here have been cheated on. None of us have ever been interviewed by the person that cheated on us on television.
That's when everything shifted. The laugh stopped meaning anything. Chris wasn't out there defending a joke anymore. He was breaking down humiliation itself. He talked about how it builds up, how it spreads, and how it eventually finds someone who won't fight back. In that equation, he wasn't the problem. He was the release valve. And by the time the audience caught on to where he was headed, it was too late. The gloves were already off, and Chris was digging deep. But he wasn't finished, not even close. Once he started pulling at that thread, everything began to unravel. He stopped treating the slap like a one-time moment, and instead framed it as the final crack in a long, messy breakdown. The real anger didn't start that night on stage. It started years before, right out in the open. And it stayed public because the people at the center of it chose to live that way. Chris didn't expose secrets. He drew a straight line through what was already there. He reminded everyone that the humiliation had already been played out, discussed, memed, and even monetized long before he ever stepped on that stage. He wasn't making pain into content. He was showing that in Hollywood, personal pain already is content. Once something stops being private and spills into the public eye, it stops belonging to just you. Everyone reacts, and that includes comedians. That's exactly where Chris's idea of selective outrage hit the hardest. Will Smith didn't confront every person who clowned him. He didn't go after the podcasts, the rappers, or the endless headlines dragging his name for months. He went after the one person he knew couldn't hit back, the guy on stage, under blinding lights, locked in by the rules of live TV. Chris made it clear he wasn't confused about why he was chosen. He was offended by it. He knew the math, and he saw it for what it was. That night wasn't a test of strength, it was a test of restraint, and Will knew exactly who he could step to without getting violence in return. Then Chris took it further. He pushed back against the idea that jokes caused the damage. According to him, the hurt didn't start with comedy. It started long before the punchline ever landed. The real wound wasn't the slap, it was the pain of seeing private betrayal turned into public entertainment. One interview, one headline, one viral clip at a time, Personal Pain became a show for everyone to watch. Chris made it clear that humiliation wasn't his to carry, and he refused to take on someone else's shame.
None of us. Like, hey, I was sucking somebody else's. How did that make you feel? Everybody in the world called him a bitch. Everybody called that man a bitch. Charlemagne called him a bitch. The Breakfast Club called him a bitch. The View and the Talk and every rapper, Drink Champs called him a bitch. Everybody called him a bitch. Everybody called him a bitch.
By the time he got to that part of his set, the laughter had faded. The crowd wasn't cracking up anymore. They were locked in, listening, because Chris wasn't roasting now. He was breaking down a cycle, and the truth he dropped hit hard. That slap, it wasn't about defending love or honor. It was about misdirected rage, pure and simple. Chris Rock just happened to be the last stop on that emotional train. But he didn't stop there. Once he tore apart Hollywood's inner contradictions, he zoomed out even further to the bigger picture of celebrity victimhood. And that's when Meghan Markle came into the mix, not as royalty, but as a perfect example of power being flipped and sold as persecution. Chris didn't deny that racism is real, he never would, but he pushed back on the idea that every awkward or uncomfortable encounter automatically counts as racism. His message came sharp and unapologetic. Sometimes pain is real, but perception can twist it into something else entirely. Some of what Meghan Markle shared didn't sound like deep institutional oppression. It sounded like straight-up family drama dressed up for the world stage. Awkward questions, cultural tension, the kind of messy in-law issues most families argue about behind closed doors, not in prime-time interviews. What really got under Chris's skin wasn't her pain, it was the framing. He called out how Meghan married into one of the most powerful families on the planet, and then acted shocked that every move came under a microscope. According to Chris, that wasn't cruelty, that was the job description. You can't step into that kind of spotlight and expect privacy to come with it. He didn't dismiss her struggle, he just pointed out that privilege doesn't erase discomfort, it just changes what level you experience it on. Then he went straight for the contradiction. Meghan said she didn't realize how racist the royal family was until after she married in, and Chris couldn't help but call that out as naive at best. Chris wasn't buying that story, not for a second. To him, that wasn't innocence or naivety, it was selective framing. He called it like he saw it. You don't marry into centuries of empire without knowing there's some heavy baggage attached. And once again, Chris wasn't just roasting a person, he was tearing open a bigger pattern. Celebrities love to turn real-life complexity into clean-cut morality plays. Heroes, villains, and victims, all neatly packaged for clicks and sympathy. But Chris reminded everyone that real life doesn't work that way. It's messy, uncomfortable, and full of gray areas. Pretending otherwise just fuels fake outrage while dodging real accountability. By the time he switched gears, his point was crystal clear. Being uncomfortable is not the same as being oppressed, and when famous people blur that line, comedians are gonna step in and redraw it with a mic, a spotlight, and no hesitation. Then Chris took aim at a whole new class of untouchables, billionaires, not because they're powerful, but because they're flat out ridiculous sometimes. Extreme wealth doesn't make anyone untouchable, it just creates problems that the rest of the world can't even relate to. And for a comedian like Chris Rock, that kind of absurdity isn't off limits, it's pure comedy gold. Elon Musk came first, and Chris didn't clown him for being ambitious or for changing the tech game. He went after the weird side effects of being that rich. When money removes every limit, it doesn't lift you higher, it cuts you off from reality. Chris painted Musk as a man so loaded that his body, habits, and daily life no longer function like a regular human. He wasn't roasting a billionaire, he was exposing how wealth at that level turns you into your own science experiment. The brilliance of the joke was how it flipped the script. It turned envy into pity. Most folks are stressing over bills or rent, but Musk, he's stressing over legacy and biology. Different planet, different problems. Chris wasn't attacking success. He was showing how it warps when it gets too extreme, how it bends reality until it's unrecognizable. Then came Jeff Bezos, and Chris sliced in with surgical precision. He didn't hype him up or call him a genius. He hit him fast and clean. Bezos wasn't the powerful disruptor in Chris's eyes. He was the punchline who just happened to own the whole building. Even his divorce didn't shake him. He lost half of everything and still ended up richer than almost anyone alive. That contrast hit the crowd hard because for most people, failure wrecks your life, but for billionaires, it's just another headline before the stock rebounds. For billionaires, losing money is basically cosmetic. It barely leaves a scratch. Their losses don't hit like everyone else's because the whole system is built to protect them forever, no matter what. Chris didn't have to spell it out. The message was loud and clear. Being rich doesn't make you untouchable, it just makes you more exposed. When real consequences vanish, the only thing that left that can hit you is public laughter. Ridicule becomes the great equalizer, and Chris made sure they felt that truth sting. Then he shifted gears, turning his focus back to a different kind of modern circus, manufactured controversy. But this time, he didn't treat it like a punchline, he framed it like a symptom. Chris was pointing at how fame itself has turned chaos into a business model. And right in the middle of that spotlight stood Jake Paul, who to Chris wasn't just another flashy boxer. He was proof that controversy had become its own kind of career. He stood there as living proof that spectacle had officially replaced substance. The outrage wasn't about boxing stats or skill. It was about the show, about the image of youth feeding on age just to get views and clicks. Chris didn't hide his frustration. It came through loud and clear. Watching a guy in his 20s knock around someone old enough for senior discounts didn't look like competition. It looked like a setup.
Everybody. And who's he hit? Me. I know you can't tell on camera. Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size. Will Smith does movies with his shirt off. You've never seen me do a movie with my shirt off. If I'm in a movie getting open heart surgery, I got on a sweater. Will Smith played Muhammad Ali in a movie. You think I auditioned for that part? People like, did it hurt? It still hurts. But I'm not a victim, baby. You will never see me on Oprah or Gayle crying. I have rooted for Will Smith my whole life. And now, I watch Emancipation just to see him get whooped. Got me rooting for Massa, okay? And a lot of people go, Chris, how come you didn't do nothing back? Because I got parents. That's why. Because I was raised. Okay?
Chris called it what it was, predatory theater. Boxing used to be built on real matchups, prime versus prime, skill versus skill. But now it had turned into a nostalgia sideshow where retired legends get rented out for clout. And that's why Chris's tone hit with so much bite. It wasn't just commentary, it was personal. To him, this wasn't sports anymore. It was exploitation dressed up as entertainment, a twisted loop of hype feeding off faded glory. Jake Paul wasn't really beating opponents, he was cashing in on memories, turning respect into revenue. He wasn't beating opponents, he was beating time. And the wildest part, the crowd was loving it because outrage, not respect, is what sells now. Then Chris took the joke into darker territory. He started talking about hate, not the thoughtful kind, not real criticism, just raw, irrational hatred, the kind that doesn't even need logic to breathe. Jake Paul had crossed into that strange zone where people don't just want him to lose, they want him erased. And that's where the twisted genius comes in. Jake doesn't need love or approval, he just needs reaction. Every boo, every angry post, every trending hashtag only fused the fire. Chris caught that instantly. He knew the outrage itself had become the product. By the end of that bit, Jake Paul wasn't a villain or a champion. He was a mirror, a reflection of what the crowd actually craves now. Shock over skill, noise over nuance, spectacle over substance. But Chris didn't stop there. He kept digging into that shift, pointing out that the chaos wasn't limited to the boxing ring. It was bleeding into Hollywood, too. Everywhere he looked, people were getting burned out, consumed by the same cycle of outrage and performance. The machine didn't just sell drama anymore, it ran on it. When Chris stepped onto the BET award stage, restraint wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't a crowd waiting for polite humor or clever balance. This was an audience built for punches that land, and Chris didn't hold back for a second. He came in swinging, and from the first line, it was clear. He wasn't aiming for harmony, he was aiming for impact. Rick Ross caught the first wave of fire, and Chris didn't ease into it through music or credibility. He went straight for the brand game. He called out how everyone wanted to copy Dr. Dre's billionaire headphone empire, turning products into status symbols overnight. But to Chris, that whole rush wasn't about creativity, it was pure imitation dressed up as innovation. And that's where he took his shot at Ross's headphones. He flipped the whole image on his head, calling them less high-end tech and more hospital-grade gear. Instead of lifestyle accessories, he joked they looked like something you'd see in an emergency room. The punchline wasn't just funny, it hit the culture hustle itself, exposing how fame often turns imitation into ambition and slaps a logo on top to sell it. The punchline hit because Chris skipped the respectful setup and went straight for the wild visual absurdity. No build-up, no warning, just instant impact. The crowd barely had time to react before he cranked it up even higher. Instead of going after Rick Ross's music or persona, Chris went all in with body humor and health jabs. Punchlines so sharp and unexpected that the audience didn't even know if they were supposed to laugh or stay silent. That kind of tension, when the line between funny and shocking disappears, that's where Chris thrives. But he didn't frame it as mean-spirited, he framed it as inevitable. To Chris, Ross symbolized pure excess, living loud, eating loud, flexing loud. All gas, no brakes. And comedians, they live for those extremes because that's where exaggeration hits hardest. By the time Chris wrapped that segment, the point had landed. Fame doesn't come with armor. No matter how big your name is, once you step into the spotlight, everything, your habits, your image, your contradictions becomes open season. And in that BET crowd, there was no hiding, no off-limit zone. Chris had made it clear, if you sign up for fame, you sign up for the fallout. Then, with the audience still catching his breath, he pivoted fast towards someone even harder to dodge than Rick Ross. Kevin Hart wasn't treated like a target, he was treated like a phenomenon. Chris didn't come for him out of jealousy, he came for him because Kevin had somehow broken the laws of Hollywood gravity. The man had gone so high so fast that even success itself started to look suspicious. Chris built the contrast perfectly. He talked about how black cinema was leveling up, taking on deeper, riskier stories, pushing boundaries, chasing prestige. And yet, no matter the tone or genre, there was Kevin Hart. Not just leading roles, he was popping up everywhere. Cameos, voiceovers, brand deals, franchise tie-ins. You name it, Kevin had a piece of it. If a movie existed, Chris joked, he was in it or literally one frame from showing up. That's when the punchline hit sharp. Kevin wasn't just overbooked, he was inescapable. Chris painted these hilarious visuals of spotting Kevin in places he clearly didn't belong. Epic dramas, intense action scenes, random background shots, like he had a teleporting agent sneaking him into every project in Hollywood. The absurdity worked because everyone could feel it. Kevin Hart had become a one-man franchise, a guaranteed payday every time his name hit a poster. Studios didn't hire him because he was the perfect fit, they hired him because he was safe money. He wasn't just a comedian anymore, he was a brand that couldn't miss. But Chris wasn't trying to tear down Kevin's grind or his hustle. He was exposing what happens when Hollywood finds a formula that makes cash too easily. The industry doesn't pause to protect it, it runs it dry until the audience itself becomes exhausted. The saturation is the punchline. And that's where Chris closed it out, with the kind of insight that hit harder than any roast. He wasn't just clowning celebrities for cheap laughs, he was charting a real map of fame. Power, pressure, ego, and excess, all crashing together under the spotlight. Every punchline Chris dropped came back to one brutal truth. Fame isn't protection, it's exposure. Once your face is everywhere, you're never really off stage. Every move, every word, every silence becomes part of the act. And Chris Rock, he's always watching, always ready to turn that spotlight back where it belongs. So what do you think? Was Chris calling out hypocrisy, or was he just brave enough to say what everyone else is too scared to admit? When fame, ego, and privilege start colliding, who walks away clean and who breaks under the pressure? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear where you stand. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up with the next breakdown. And if you're ready for more, click the video right here to dive even deeper into how other big names cracked under the same blinding spotlight.